Tuesday, September 5th, 2023. It is 1:30 p.m. and you are at a Wausau Waterworks Commission meeting here at City Hall. Welcome. The first item on our agenda, I guess first I'll note, we have all of our commissioners here in person. Thanks for joining us. The first item on our agenda is to approve the minutes from the August 7th, 2023 meeting. It looks like I have a motion from Alder Herbst and a second by Commissioner Jean. Any comments or questions? Alrighty, all of those in favor of approving the minutes of the August 7th, 2023 meeting can signify by saying aye. Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Next up, we have item number 2, Director's Report on Utility Operations, and I will pass the mic over to Eric.
Thanks, Mayor. So we have a few items on the Director's Report today. Update on the PFAS testing from August, corrosion control treatment, and then some updates on the wastewater facility, which Ben has put together as well, which is appreciated to keep projects up to date as well. So if any of the commissioners have specific questions on any of those.
Any questions from commissioners? Mr. Jean. I might need you to turn your mic on. Thank you.
The cured in place pipe on Fleeth and M, is that larger, that 30-inch, or is that?
Yeah, I believe that's our interceptor,
okay.
Correct? Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you.
Other questions or comments? All right. I don't see any. Anything else you want to talk about on the Director's Report?
I don't think so.
All right.
All right.
Well, then I think we're ready to move on to item number 3. This is our presentation and update by Capital Infrastructure Partners regarding the lead service line 5-year replacement scope of services. We do have Sean and Sean here.
Thank you. Appreciate the time, and if I can click, yeah. So I think all of you were here, I believe, when we were here in May last to talk about a community-based public-private partnership. So as you all know, that solicitation went out and was awarded to Community Infrastructure Partners. So we just wanted to catch everybody up in anticipation of what's coming down the pike. So we want to just refresh on the CBP3 delivery model, talk about the team that's been assembled to do this work in Wausau, timeline, and leave time for any questions that anybody may have on that. So as everyone here knows, there are 8,000 lead service lines here. This method of delivery that the city has gone forward with is the first of its kind in the United States for dealing with lead service line replacements. And as a result of that, already there's been a good amount of attention both at the state level with the DNR as well as at the White House and at the EPA level. So historically, no one has taken a programmatic approach that integrates community benefits into the replacement of their lead service lines. And there's a lot of interest and attention as a result of that. So just a quick refresher on the CBP3. This was a delivery model that the EPA developed in the early 2010s. The point of that was to integrate community and socioeconomic benefits into large infrastructure programs. So the idea being, how do you take those types of funding and financing efforts and integrate economic development activities into that delivery? So as you'll see, the technical work is executed by local, small, minority-owned firms, customizable to the particular community. So CIP, as the contracted partner, does not self-perform any of this work. And as a result of that, we're able to work with as many firms that do that type of work that meet the criteria of the public entity. The compensation is performance-based, so there are KPIs or key performance indicators that govern the contract that align to those metrics that are determined by the public side. And in order to receive full compensation, those metrics have to be met. Community goals that are specific to the particular public entity. Again, you'll see workforce development, youth education, resident participation, any number of things that are customizable to the particular community get integrated into the contract, and again, is tied to compensation. And private financing is not required in this delivery, although typically that is a part of regular P3s. The funding for this is primarily coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I believe we shared this with you last time. We won't go through it all again, but the traditional approach to this versus the CBP3, just a couple things to highlight. One that's really important is community-driven outreach. So historically, one of the biggest hurdles to getting a lot of participation in programs like this has been on the outreach side. So there's a very overt and deliberate attempt to focus on community outreach, and that will have its own designated resources and partnerships, as you'll see in the team, that have a specialization in how to go about doing that. Cost savings are obviously a huge part of this as well. Cost savings that are achieved stay in the program. So if there's a fixed price per line, any savings beyond that stay in the program and enable more lines to be replaced. And as we said previously, performance-based contracting is a huge part of this. So it forces aligned interests to ensure that the goals of the community are met through the CBP3. This looks probably pretty scary to you, but it's intended to show all the different participants in who's being brought to this program, both nationally and locally. So as you'll see in the highlighted parts, government relations and technical assistance, the Environmental Policy Innovation Center out of Washington, D.C., was a think tank that has been very central to actually writing the lead service line component of the bipartisan infrastructure law. Through that, they're very well connected to a lot of the philanthropic sources as well as other decision makers at the EPA. And the belief is that there are opportunities to bring those resources to Wausau because you guys are taking a very different and first of its kind approach to doing this. 120 Water is the preeminent platform provider to track full soup to nuts of the delivery of lead service line replacements. So from identifying the homes all the way through community outreach, delivery, post-replacement testing, 120 has been on the largest programs in the country, Newark, Denver, just to name a couple. Blue Conduit, another national firm that does predictive analytics. They have best-in-class technology that allows them to figure out where the lead actually is. As that service is required, that is accessible as well to this team. And then getting into more of the local side. So LIUNA is the National Laborers Union. In Wisconsin, it's the Wisconsin Laborers District Council. They are part of this as a participant to provide training programs as well as potentially contract labor as this program scales over time. And nationally, there is anticipated to be a pretty significant contractor shortage. DAR is a local engineer and will be prime contractor, MBE. Headquartered in Milwaukee, office in Tomahawk. They will serve as a general contractor on this work. From both a community outreach and public health perspective, both the Medical College of Wisconsin, locally here, as well as H2N, will be active participants. H2N on the community outreach side, particularly in the Hmong and Latino communities. It's been very impressive what they were able to do as they were formed through the COVID crisis, and believe that they're an excellent resource for continuing to do outreach to get full participation from the communities in which they work in. The Medical College of Wisconsin is using this program to use mentorship programs for their medical students and have a very robust community health worker model that they use for their medical students. So they're going to place students in the program to see how that actually takes place from a grassroots perspective. And then the last piece, which is really important and interesting from a number of perspectives, is the Water Finance Exchange is a national nonprofit that really focuses on regionalizing infrastructure. So as it pertains to this particular program, there's been a concern at both the national and state level that more rural or smaller municipalities and utilities are not going to have the resources in place even to apply for the funding, let alone to mobilize a program to replace the lines in their community. And as a result of that, the mayor has agreed to serve as a regional hub for some of the surrounding communities, whether that's the 5 counties or potentially even beyond. And as a result of that, the Water Finance Exchange has the ability to not only do the outreach to the surrounding communities, but tap into funding sources outside of the bipartisan infrastructure law that can help drive down the costs and ultimately result in more lines that can get replaced. So quick refresher on the timeline. The city had submitted for their year 1 funding in June, over 500 lines in year 1. We had a meeting collectively with the DNR last week in Madison, and I think it's fair to say have their full support in going forward. And they were very encouraged by what's happening here and absolutely seem willing to make it work however they can. Again, it's important to know that the way this worked was the federal government gave the funding to the states to figure out how to administer this program, and there hasn't been precedent for it. So even for the DNR, who has administered some programs, they've never had to do it at this scale for lead service line replacements. So they've been very open to working through some of the gray areas that haven't applied in different programs before. We anticipate having a contract for approval in the October-November timeframe that will come before the commission, is my understanding. In January and February, the loan will close with the DNR. And we expect to begin work sometime in the March-April timeframe to replace the first 500 lines. And as you can see, that scales over the 5 years that the funding is available to replace all 8,000 lines during that time. A lot of words, apologize, and just open it up for any questions.
Yeah. Are there any questions from this body? I see a pensive Robinson, so why don't we start there?
So tell me, so we're talking about loans, and we're talking about accessing, I imagine, the Safe Drinking Water Act for lead service lines. Walk us through the process of the loan.
Sure. So, yes.
Thank you.
So there's about $400 million coming to the state of Wisconsin over the next 5 years. At the state level, 51% will be loans, 49% will be principal forgiveness, so grants. However, the way that Wisconsin DNR is breaking that down is they're looking at either by city or by census tract, they're going to allocate a different percentage based on certain economic conditions. And Wausau as a city will qualify as 75% principal forgiveness for construction costs. We can get that to a higher percentage, we believe, if we target certain census tracts that are more disadvantaged. They should qualify higher than 75% for the construction costs for principal forgiveness. So if you break down year 1 of 5.3 million, you assume 80% of that roughly will be construction costs. At least 75% of those construction costs citywide are eligible for principal forgiveness. But if we start in disadvantaged census tracts, that percentage can be higher. Anything that's not covered by principal forgiveness will be awarded as a loan, which is 1/4%, so 0.25% interest, which is subsidized well below the traditional drinking water state revolving funds. And that could be amortized over a 20-year period. So the way that we envision that is there's very specific deadlines for applying for this funding. So the intent to apply is due October 31st of every year, and then the actual application's due June 30th of the following year to get the money the year following that. So we anticipate the funding awards for year 1, which we know the application was 5.3 million, will be announced within the next 4 to 6 weeks from DNR. And then you'll know exactly what percentage will be grants or principal forgiveness and what percentage will be loans. And then we'll follow that same timeline each subsequent year.
I see one of our partners is giving kind of a quizzical look, and I'm just wondering, could you describe, it's possible for cities to put multiple applications in and some for very targeted neighborhoods. Yeah.
Yes. So the way that we can do it is we can apply citywide, understanding that Wausau citywide qualifies for that 75% principal forgiveness, and then you'll have flexibility on where you're using that money throughout the city. Or you can apply for very specific, and you could do both, very specific census tracts or neighborhood blocks that you know will qualify for a higher percentage of principal forgiveness. So we anticipate doing that, as needed as we go through our annual planning process with the city. Essentially, what we're trying to do is position the city to maximize principal forgiveness and grants, so you don't have to take on as much loans as most other communities would. There's also additional funding available that we're looking into. As Sean mentioned, there's the regional hub that Wausau will be. That's going to bring more resources from different funding pots to this region, and ideally Wausau taps into some of that. There's also philanthropic funding from like Joyce Foundation, Rockefeller, Gates Foundation. A lot of these are part of the inaugural Biden-Harris Get the Lead Out program, which the city of Wausau is part of. So we plan on trying to explore all avenues to maximize the grant and principal forgiveness.
So let me be the devil's advocate in saying, if there's 400 million over a 5-year period,
Yeah.
it's 80 million a year, and, Milwaukee's got a significant problem. Where are the guarantees to us that we're going to be able to, in year 3, 4, and 5, when others see some success here and want to get into the game, that we'll actually get the money out?
So that we can't guarantee where the money is going to come from and what the funding amount is going to be from DNR. We know Milwaukee very well, and we think they're under applying right now, which leaves more money available for communities across the state. Wausau is going first, and the fact that Wausau is going first means they're getting more support at the national level from the White House and the EPA, state level with our discussions from DNR, and then philanthropic support as well, we anticipate. So our guarantee is that we're going to explore all avenues. We just don't know exactly where all of the money is coming from. We assume the vast majority is coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law.
So one of your selling points was local and MBEs, and I'm not seeing that. Can you embellish how we're getting local labor and MBE, local contractors and MBEs?
Yes.
You're asking
while
all the good questions, promise you.
And while Milwaukee may be local to some, we don't consider Milwaukee local?
So local is something that needs to be defined, and that'll be defined in our contract, and that can mean the city of Wausau, it can mean Marathon County, it can mean the 5 counties that make up central Wisconsin, or it could be statewide. So that's really up to the city and the commission on what you want to define local as. The broader, the higher percentage, obviously, right? Because there's just more labor to choose from. The other thing that we do is we do workforce development and contractor development. So workforce development takes longer, but that's the partnership with LIUNA. That's also part of the Biden-Harris Get the Lead Out partnership. They're going to essentially set apprenticeship programs, and then they do 4,000 hours of training, and you can do that Wausau residents, you can do Marathon County residents. So by year 2.5, year 3, those individuals are actually ready to perform, right? So that's a longer timeline. The other one is contractor development, where we tap into residential plumbers or other types of trades that aren't working directly today with utilities and municipalities, but we essentially provide the support and training to get them certified on lead, so they're ready to go a lot faster. And we can do that by creating annual cohorts and pairing them with like big brother or big sister firms that provide that hands-on training.
And a final question for now.
For now.
One of the items on the agenda is the mandatory replacement ordinance. How critical is that to these efforts? And what happens if it isn't adopted?
So we think it helps. We don't think it's critical. What we do is we take on the responsibility of homeowner recruitment, because we will guarantee through performance-based metrics a certain volume in a given construction season, and that'll be our responsibility to get these homeowners on board. Newark is a good example where they did have, they had ordinances that allowed tenants to provide access, which is very unique, but that was, they were able to get a much higher adoption rate than most other municipalities. So it's not 100% critical, but it helps, and we're moving forward whether it's there or whether it's not. We feel confident through our targeted outreach that will be successful.
Mr. Force.
gentlemen, looking at the timeline, on our sheets, we see that by March 2024 to November 2024, 500 lead service lines will be replaced. That's just a little bit over 6 months off. What is your timeline for this public outreach program, which I'm assuming has to be in place and functioning and succeeding before you can start digging in March of 2024?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things that we asked DNR when we met with them last week in Madison is, can we start spending money today on things like outreach, even though the loan's not going to close until February? So we are going to start outreach as soon as the contract's signed, ideally in October, to make sure that we have, we already have 3 census tracts that are identified in the first application, and I think two of them are disadvantaged, which would position the city for more principal forgiveness. We're going to start in those areas and really start, working with H2N and working with other community outreach firms to really educate homeowners and educate contractors on the program to try to get their buy-in, so we know exactly where the programs are, so we can bid out these projects during the winter time. So as soon as the ground's no longer frozen in mid-April, maybe, we can be in construction immediately, so we can do all 500.
Just to follow up, in your minds, I mean, you've told us this, and we understand that this is the first of a kind. In your mind, when you look at 500 lines in 6 months in 2024, 1,500 and up to 2,000 in subsequent years, how do you see this happening? In other words, that's a lot of lines per day. I think at a minimum it's maybe 4 lines per day. At a maximum it's 10, 15 lines a day. I mean, our experience here in Wausau is it takes time to get lines in the ground. And I'm just wondering, in your minds, can you explain to us how you see this proceeding at such a rapid pace?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that we've experienced with stormwater and other forms of infrastructure before, which is why you scale up. But it's the programmatic delivery that enables that, as well as here the dynamic of being able to move first. So what's going to happen is when you communicate that you have a 5-year program to do this, and you complete year 1, you're going to continue to attract contractors through outreach, through the workforce development piece that doesn't stop. So you just continue to expand your crews. And by getting out ahead of everybody else, you can establish that that program here is sustainable. And not only does it attract contractors, which we're doing that work proactively, it also helps do price enforcement so that you're not competing with 1 or 2 other firms. So we've experienced this type of rapid scale over time, and Wausau is doing all the right things right now to enable that.
Yeah, Mr. Jean.
The number 8,000 lead is on the private side. Does it include I think we're around 4,000 or 5,000 remaining on the public side, which is still part of that 8,000. So would the program deal with just both sides, or the private side if that's all that needs to be done? So
Yeah, so the program will deal with both sides, but we are starting, my understanding is the city prefers to start with the lines that have been replaced on the public side, because the way that Wisconsin DNR awards principal forgiveness is they're first awarding it to the private side, and then any principal forgiveness left over at the state level will be awarded to the public side. So in the early years, if we focus on all the lines that have been done, that have already been changed out on the public side and that only have a private side lead pipe, you're going to get a much higher percentage grant or principal forgiveness funding. But we will be able to do full lines as well, public and private.
if you guys can't deliver, can we get out of the program after year 1 or 2, whatever?
Yes,
Okay.
But you're going to deliver.
of course.
Okay. And maybe just an update from my side. I reached out to, I don't know, maybe 50 people and organizations last week, telling them about this program, from the White House to foundations, and universally the feedback has been excitement. How can we support you? What do you need? So I think this is going to be kind of a big deal. Yeah, Mr. Force.
One other quick question. Back to what John mentioned earlier about mandated replacement. I wasn't clear on that answer. My understanding up to date is that the ordinance that we will have, in fact, it's on the agenda, I believe, is a mandatory replacement. At the same time, as a commissioner, I've had a lot of public reaction from folks who say my water is okay, or we have a filter system and it's okay. I don't want my yard torn up. So there is some interest in a non-mandated ordinance, and I wasn't clear from your answer whether that could or could not be part of this plan.
That really is a decision for you guys to make. I'm not going to say we don't have an opinion on it, but it's not in our purview. So obviously it makes your conversion rate much higher, but as you said, there's a lot of considerations that need to go into that. So Newark did it to avoid a Flint-like situation there and ended up with, they say 100%, but it clearly wasn't 100. So it's entirely up to the appetite of this body to decide if that's something that they want to pursue.
And I think, too, there's enough low-hanging fruit that we wouldn't necessarily need that immediately, but it would be something to consider as we get further along in this process and if we find resistance to the voluntary. I saw a hand up. Mr. Jean.
Well, at this point, there wouldn't be any cost to the property owner, correct?
That's the
Correct,
goal.
yeah. There can't be as part of using the federal funds. So just to close the point that the mayor was making, I think the approach that the city is taking, both from a maximizing the principal forgiveness portion of this, as well as doing the 500 lines first and the prioritized community, part of what you're really trying to do is build a public relations campaign around that. So ideally, people want to participate in the program because you're communicating the health benefits, because their fellow community members have experienced a seamless, easy process with the contractors that are doing the work. There's no bad press or rumors or reputation around leaving lawns dug up or not doing the work properly. So ideally, over time, you really get the benefit of a mandate without having a mandate because people just want it done because they've seen the success within the community.
Yeah, follow up.
I was thinking of lawn restoration, but then you kind of answered that. But these pipes typically are in the same trench, and to do it where you would, with minimal open trenching, you might have conflicts with the sanitary sewer. So have you thought that through, or and if the property owner would like to have that done, can that be an add-on charge?
Yeah, so our colleagues who are more on the technical side did a ride-along 2 weeks ago and actually saw the replacement in Wausau of a lead service line as well as a sanitary sewer line. Yes, we want to try to do horizontal boring in a way where we're not digging up the entire lawn when possible. We want to avoid, digging up driveways and removing trees and, in all circumstances. But if there is a 75-year-old sewer line, we can certainly ask the homeowner, do you want us to replace it while we're doing it? Because they are in a very similar situation, they're very close to each other, and it'll be a lot more affordable to take advantage of that.
Robinson. Oh. No? Anyone else? Anything to add, Eric, or?
I know we're going to talk about the lead or the mandatory replacement ordinance, but I think one of the things too that the commission has to consider with the mandatory ordinance, there can be, stipulations in the ordinance. It's not where the city will just say, look, we're going to replace this and all. The commission can consider things like as funding is available, right? So it's not like a hard and fast item, but it's something that can be determined. But I think the other thing with the mandatory ordinance is that if we do take on loans with this project, which ultimately we will, right? Then in order to pay those loans back for the private side replacements anyway, with the PSC revenue rates, we're going to need a mandatory ordinance in place, and whatever that looks like, right? In order to use those user rates to pay that loan back. So I think, if we start discussing the mandatory ordinance and some considerations that the commission would like, I think the sooner the better. So I think that's something that will have to eventually be in place, and I think the sooner that the commission considers that, the better, as we roll this program out.
Mr. Robinson?
So we have the schedule and the milestones. What, from the commission and the city's perspective, what are the milestones relative to future action on the part of this body and the council to advance this? I assume that if we're looking at loans, there's going to need to be a commitment relative to each loan. I would assume that if we're looking at contracting, there's the approval of the contracts. But what are we looking at? Have we scoped out what the decision points are, the pinch points for us as we go forward, and do we have that schedule? I think it's important that we know what that is so we don't inadvertently miss it. And we still have that very cumbersome ITA process, the intent to apply, and there are no guarantees with that. But have we scoped out what those milestone stepping point zones are?
Yeah, I think very simply, like our initial contract with CIP, right, will come likely in October to this body, right, for consideration on approval. From that point, any funding that's available, closing on loans, anything, even the principal forgiveness, because it is a forgivable loan, would have to go to council, right, because they approve any sort of borrowing or otherwise. And so every year, then, as we move forward from year to year, would come to this commission for approval as an amendment or, to their contract. Like, so year one would be 2024. Next year, the commission would consider year two, which would be 2025. I think that it's always right with the way the funding is with the DNR, right? We are going to be moving forward with some of these contracts. Hopefully, at the same time, we're getting the same information from the DNR on the applications. Like this year, we're expecting that information to come out in the next few weeks on what the funding is for next year. We expect to be on the same timeline, hopefully next year, that things aren't delayed, so.
So have we done a pro forma relative to, obviously, we've got project cost and we've got funding sources, but ultimately, one of the concerns, given the rate increase that we just had on the water rates, do we know what the range of risk or range of impact to the utility would be based upon this schedule? So if we get, if we maximize funding at approximately 80%, what's our cost and what might that do to utility rates? Because there's still that other 20%.
Yeah, I think that, we brought some estimates together before, but I think once we actually know what our actual funding is for 2024, we'll continue to work with finance and Ellers and bring that information back. So that might be one of the considerations with the contract, right? What are the impacts to ratepayers? Is there an impact to ratepayers? We don't know that yet, right? Till we know how much principal forgiveness, grants, and otherwise. And just like with the other types of funding that CIP will be pursuing for us, we don't know what other type of funding we're going to get in. So, if any. And yeah.
So follow-up question directed to you. So in light of that and the uncertainty in our rate structures and our burden on utility payers, is that something that comes into play when you're going out for the philanthropic and third-party funding? And how does that benefit us, and how does that come into play?
Yeah, it comes into play as it's additive. So I think, as the gentleman said previously, not only do you have outs each year as an annual plan comes forward based on the funding that you're applying for and ultimately get, the program can scale up and scale down as a result of that. So you, as a body, may decide some point in year 3 that you've gotten less in principal forgiveness for whatever reason than you anticipated from the DNR, and you hit a certain debt threshold where you just say, we don't want to take any more on than this. That's the flexibility of the program and how it works, so that you're not tied to anything beyond each year's annual plan with an off-ramp every year that the annual plan comes up. So philanthropic sources, RCAP, rural communities, any number of other sources that have large amounts of funding, that just gets brought in as part of each annual plan. So we'll have a continuous, I would imagine, for 5 years of constantly sourcing funds outside of the bipartisan infrastructure law, because you're going to know annually what that is, and that's going to be set until the following year. But in between, there's going to be any number of other sources to continually go back to.
Alder Herbst.
Just sounds like a silly question, but what would happen, I know, it's
No,
on.
you're on. Yeah, you're good.
What would happen if we would not be able to complete this in 5 years? Would there be such a thing as an extension, maybe go into a 6th year? Is that a possibility?
From a state perspective,
Well, as we're going here, maybe we're seeing that we're not accomplishing, that's, for example, 2,000 homes in this year, and I know we would review this every year, but let's say we could not fulfill those 2,000 homes as we're going through those, 3 last years.
sure. Yeah, so we anticipate this, not necessarily the state funding side, but municipalities and utilities going as long as they need to go. So we're in another part of the country where they have 50,000 lines. They know that they're not going to do that in 5 years. They're probably going to do it in 12 to 15 years. So it's really the appetite of the individual public entity, as well as what the funding sources are, what their debt appetite is to do that. So you could theoretically say, we want to do this over 10 years, knowing that, we're going to use different funding sources. We're going to finance the back end of it much more than we're going to use or be able to maximize the principal forgiveness side of it. So it's up to each individual community based on their volume and how fast they want to push and how fast they're able to push.
Mia?
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think once this program gets started, I really do believe that people will really get on board and we will meet this. Wausau seems to be pretty doggone aggressive in everything that we do. Thank you to the mayor. Mm-hmm. And I do think that we can meet this commitment, and I'm hoping that the people will really buy into it, because it is very important that they do so. Thank you.
I appreciate the comment, and I think, I can't remember who said it earlier, but this is one of those things where it sounds like a little bit of a hyperbolic statement, but the eyes of the country really are going to be on Wausau and how they go about doing it. The mayor indicated already the attention that she's gotten. So from the infrastructure czar's chief of staff, from people on the vice president's staff. So nobody here around this table or this side of the table can afford anything but success from this. And so the resources will be brought in full force to make sure that it happens.
And I know this commission understands it, but maybe for the public, the plan that we had for a replacement schedule with all the lines was a 15-year plan. And so this is accelerating it to 5. So it's pretty big change, but also pretty exciting. Are there any further questions? Any last comments?
No, appreciate the time and great questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Okay, I guess we are flowing seamlessly into item number 4, discussion and possible action on approving a mandatory lead service line replacement ordinance. I don't know who wants to take a crack at this first.
I guess I can kick it off. I don't have any information for you, Ann. I don't know if you have any discussions for this item, but I think that one of the things, when we had brought this before, and I think we had brought it like maybe 2 or 3 different times before. The last time was Nate Miller, who was an attorney with the city, had brought it forward with some options and just some what other communities have done, like Kenosha. And since that time, the PSC has been more open to like, hey, we're going to require a mandatory replacement of a lead service line, right? As on the private side, as funding is available, right? So they've they've allowed language like that. And so whether that language is more specific in that, as long as funding's available to, subsidize that cost up to 50%, or as long as there's funding available for the commission or the city to determine if these lines need to be replaced or will be replaced at this point. We know that the lead and copper rule right now, which goes into effect in October of '24, is going to require full replacement. So if we replace our side, the private side has to get replaced. And so it's just a determination on, sort of putting this into something official on the city side. Because we need, as the utility, we don't want to go through and reconstruct a street and not be able to replace our side of the lead service lines. And so because the laws are going to require us to do it, I think we need something in place on our side to pursue this and have the option to do this.
Any questions, comments? Mr. Force?
So Eric, are we going to see some language at a subsequent meeting?
Yeah. I think that part of that discussion, I was kind of hoping to have actually some language today,
Okay.
but it just didn't get prepared in time.
Sure.
So some of the things, yeah, absolutely, you'll see some language, but I guess one thing that I would like some comments from the commission, are you open to this idea? I know that it gets some resistance from the public. I hear it too, but I think we need to do it carefully. We need to look at what other municipalities are doing. And then also making sure that the PSC is okay with the language that we do put in, for this, so.
And if there are things that this commission think that we should include in an ordinance, I think that would be valuable for us to know.
Yeah.
So we can craft it in there. Mr. Robinson?
Well, I would think we would want to have a discussion in enlightenment relative to the private side funding options. So we're talking about, where are we in the public side, which clearly is the responsibility of the commission in the city. But as we get into this and as we look at doing that, we've talked about, the state having money available to the private side. But what happens if that isn't enough? Is the assumption that the utility is picking up that or loaning? Or I think we need just to have a discussion of how are we addressing the funding and what are the expectations on the private side?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah, I think that decision needs to be made as well.
Mr. Force?
I was encouraged by the comment from the presenters about the efficacy of horizontal directional drilling. I've been pushing for that for a long time, and I'm glad to hear that they have that technology in their plans. And I think that would help facilitate where we have homeowners who are worried about their gardens and their driveways and their decks and their patios, et cetera. If we can maximize the use of that. The second comment, and it's just a question for Eric, Mayor, whoever, John. Is there any data out there showing that once lead service lines have been replaced in a community or in a neighborhood, that the lead levels have actually gone down in the drinking water? I can't find that anywhere.
I don't know if I have that data, but I do know we could probably find people who would know if that exists. Like the health department for sure is interested in this project.
Right, we always hear about the other side. In other words, we hear about the amount of lead in your drinking water and you should let your faucets run, et cetera. And we also hear about the amount of lead in the blood of children in a certain community.
Yeah.
But I'm looking for the data on the other side. It says after we've taken these precautions and spent this money, have we really seen an improvement?
Well, I don't know about data, Jim. I guess I haven't looked at that portion, right? But, the lead in the water, right, is from the lines itself, right? And I think eliminating the private side service line up to the meter is obviously going to eliminate that threat, right? But we also have everything from lead solder to possibly lead lines, galvanized lines in the home, and so So I do think, like with our testing and stuff, obviously, we're going to be testing fifth liter coming up, and I think that's going to be a challenge for us to pass that type of testing. So, yeah. But I also haven't found the data, but it would be interesting to see if it's out there. Yeah. Appreciate the question.
Mr. Robinson?
Toward that end, you've got the lead lines in the house, you've got the fixtures, the older fixtures that have the lead in them. Are we aware of any other communities that have gone, from the street to the inside and inside the house and made either grants, loans, or other things available to upgrade the inner workings of their own system?
Are you?
Nothing I'm aware of in the homes. Generally, it's service lines coming in.
And, obviously we work with HUD on some of the lead paint and windows and things like
Right.
that. And actually some of the outreach we did on the service lines, I got reaction like, can we just do everything and get rid of all the lead in the paint and in the windows as well? So,
I think one of the things too to recognize too is that even, if the city goes through and replaces all the lead service lines within the city up to the meter, right? The city will still be doing corrosion control, right? Because of those other issues. It's not like we just back away from that, right? Because we know that on the private side, inside the home, that there still are potential issues and risks. And so we want to mitigate that.
follow up?
Are you looking for a statement of intent from the commission to proceed with this? Would it be helpful if we made a motion to direct staff to
I think
develop a sample ordinance and make future presentations to this commission?
Yeah,
I
that
would-
would be helpful for
I would
me.
make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Robinson to request staff to give a sample mandatory replacement, lead service line replacement, private side. Is that a second that I'm seeing in your? Yes, I have a second by Jean. Discussion on this direction that we're giving. Alrighty, so all of those in favor of approving the motion to request staff craft a draft or sample mandatory lead service line replacement ordinance can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty, more of that discussion to come. All right, next up, item number 5, discussion and possible action approving additional costs to the GAC project for working through winter, shortening the time of construction.
Thanks, Mayor. I put a memo in here. I'll probably have Susan with Donahue come up and give a little bit of explanation on this moving forward as well, and then to help answer any questions between the two of us. Thanks, Susan.
Sounds good, thank you. Eric put the memo in to explain where we're at. We have awarded the contract, of course, for the GAC replacement. Construction will begin shortly here. And the contractor has approached us to indicate that they may be able to accelerate the schedule. And what you have in your packet is information showing that that potential schedule acceleration. To basically to accelerate the schedule, what they would do is continue construction through the winter. So basically by tenting the building and continuing their masonry construction throughout the winter. Otherwise, based on the current contracted schedule, they would basically, at a certain point, stop construction for a period of a couple of months or several months during the worst of the winter conditions. And what I also provided to you, just to put this all in context, is just an update on where we're at with funding. I feel like you guys are going to get just a large dose of safe drinking water and funding and bipartisan infrastructure law funding here today. Gina, are these ready to go? If it's okay, do you want me to step through these slides, Eric?
Just,
Sure. Will it work?
There's just a couple.
yeah.
Is that okay?
Next
Yeah.
arrow.
Okay. This clicker, and I'm always nervous about it. Can you just advance the slide, Gina, please? Thank you. There's like 2 slides here. So basically, this just shows you where we anticipate being with funding for the GAC system. So right now, you can see the contracted cost with the GAC system at about $17.4 million. And then we've got projected costs, for the interim solution, which is the ion exchange resin for 2 changeouts. And then what we're anticipating right now, based on DNR's anticipated or current award that has been made in March for safe drinking water loan, state fiscal year 23, and then anticipated potential amount for state fiscal year 24, plus the federal appropriation money. So you can see the grant funding there of about around $7.8 million. So I just wanted to put this in context with the potential of a cost increase for the project. Yeah.
So what is the cost right now of the ion exchange resin? Because I think we were talking at one time about 800,000 plus 200,000 for $1 million, and now I'm looking at 2.5 million. Do we know what the cost per changeout is?
That is fixed right now. If you go back to that previous slide, please. That is under contract right now with the contractor to do the changeout, and the resin cost is based on the purchase of the resin for the first changeout. Obviously, depending on what happens with market prices, it's possible that amount could change. So we're at about $1.2 million for
Plus
the
the
resin
changeout cost.
Correct. Well, that is the change out for one time.
That's all costs?
That's all in.
Resin, everything?
All in. Resin, contractor, everything.
So if we accelerate the schedule and we save ourselves 3 months, and we're looking at approximately a half year per resin bed.
Correct.
So we're saving hypothetically $600,000, to put it in the context, in resin cost or deferred. And the question is that the resin was put in place for multiple purposes. It was put in place relative to PFAS,
And water
sequestering PFAS, as well as dealing with some of the iron manganese. Other issues, what is, when we get into those, what's the life expectancy of the resin if the PFAS are being removed by the GAC system?
You want to field that one, Scott, or?
No, I think the intention here would be that we would accelerate the construction in hopes of eliminating the need for that second changeout.
But again, the question
20
is,
years,
is the
right?
resin is there for 2 purposes?
20 years on the TOC.
Okay.
Yeah, for the TOC
For TOC,
removal.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know where I pulled that from, but
You got it.
what other questions? So we're looking at an additional about 300,000 if we were to push forward and get it done earlier,
Correct.
and maybe not have to do an additional resin chainish out.
Correct.
Mr. Robinson?
I would move that we advance the accelerated schedule.
I got a second from a couple of folks, but I saw Mr. Jean first. Any additional comments on this? And just to be clear, we're looking at an anticipated, date finish of the project. I'm sure it's in here, and I looked at it.
Be
in
late July.
July, okay.
Yep.
Perfect. That's glorious.
Yeah, and if I can just, yeah, this doesn't show the contractor's proposed schedule, but it's in your packet. We are still working on some of the details of some of the long lead time items. But generally, right now, the schedule you have in front of you, shows that July timeframe,
Awesome.
August maybe.
Questions, comments? Mr. Robinson?
Toward that end, is there an ability to amend the contract to have stipulated penalties for failure to meet that if we're going to accelerate?
Yes, the intent would be to, with a change order to accelerate the contract, there would be an associated change in substantial and final completion, and then also liquidated damages associated with not meeting those completion dates.
That's good because we're still traumatized. Mr. Jean?
I think it's fair to say, but everybody will correct me if I'm wrong anyway, but I think we would be removing to a lower level of PFAS if we had the GACs in place.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not only a financial decision, it's also a drinking water question.
Health. Yep, exactly. Mr. Force?
Just to be clear, on this first resin changeout, what is the timetable on that?
Well, it started last Monday.
Okay.
With one vessel being completed in the first week. I think the next changeouts or the next vessels will go a little more quickly. It took a little bit of an effort to just for the contractor to kind of streamline the process
Sure.
and figure out, the whole scheduling because there's, cleaning the vessel, removing the material. So the second vessel, I think Scott can probably tell us if that one has been taken out of service
Well, let
as
me
of
just
today.
to avoid all
I mean,
the-
basically within 6 weeks.
Okay,
the
so
next
by
5 to 6
October 1,
weeks.
October 15,
Somewhere in there, yeah.
we'll be operating on our second supply of
Correct.
resin.
Yep.
And we hope it to go until July, John? Is that the timetable we're looking at?
I'm thinking back to the bench scale studies, weren't we running in that 150, 180 days?
It's tight.
Help me.
I think that was the, I think that was the estimated. I mean,
Yeah.
ideally, we're looking at, in practicality, about 9 months, maybe even getting 10 months out of the resin. So it's tight.
It's possible.
It's possible.
Okay.
Yep.
So you do make a point of the fact that you're swapping out multiple beds. Like, if we needed to, maybe it wouldn't make sense at all just to do a partial resin swap out, or if you just do all or nothing. I don't know.
It's possible. I mean, depending on how you can sequence the operation of the vessels. I mean, right now, all 6 would be in operation. But if we got into, something tight, I think, we could, if we're looking like we're getting really close, I think there might be some options there.
Okay. Mr. Robinson?
Is that predicated on contact time? The removal of the PFAS in the resin is based upon contact time?
Well,
What other factors?
essentially, it's predicated on the amount that you're taking out, right? Like the resin itself only has a certain amount of PFAS that it can adhere to it.
Some of
Exactly. There you go. So, I mean, it's got a finite volume of PFAS that it can remove, and that's all dependent on the level coming into, from the raw water, which obviously we have no control over, and then also the volume of water that you're using.
Further questions? Comments? We have a motion to approve accelerating this project. So if there's no further discussion, all in favor of approving additional costs to the GAC project for working through winter, shortening the timeline of construction, can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Yeah. All right, next up, number 6, discussion and possible action approving PFAS testing for the wastewater utility.
You want me to start
Kick her
this
off.
off, Ben? So we, over the last probably 2 to 3 months, we had conversation with Marathon County Landfill with regards to accepting leachate. We had talked about developing an agreement. We had talked about what processes would need to be in place before that we did that. We know with our future WPDES, our discharge permit, we will be required to sample our wastewater. And so I think it would be a good idea for us to consider at this point, getting some baseline numbers for both our influent, effluent, and our biosolids, especially if we're going to be beginning to work with the landfill. One of our discussions too was to have them consider the same. So if we were to accept that in the future, that we would understand what we were accepting, and we could actually work with some engineering firms and try to figure out what would be needed to introduce that into our system, how much we could introduce a day, what impacts we would have, and so on and so forth. So I guess our first step with that, and we have another agenda item too, but our first step with that would be for us to begin testing on our side.
Mr. Robinson, I feel like you might have something to say on this.
First of all, let me thank staff for bringing this recommendation forward. I think it's a good move. There are, in addition to the considerations of the leachate from the county, I think we're starting to see more and more concerns relative to farmers and other biosolid spreading sites, that they want this information to the point where you may run out of sites without the information. I think it'll be extremely beneficial in those efforts. And I would support this, and I would move that we proceed with the sampling of influent, effluent, and biosolids.
All right, we have a motion. Looks like I have a second. I think Mr. Force got out ahead of you, but maybe also
I had a
wants.
comment. You can second.
Oh, we got a second by Herbst then officially. Mr. Force.
The annual cost of 25.5, is the Marathon County landfill picking up any of that?
No.
We're testing their leachate, right?
No, this is just our side.
It'll be on their own. They'll be
Oh,
liable for their
sorry.
testing.
This does not
We'll do our
include that.
own.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Further questions or comments? All righty. Then all those in favor of approving PFAS testing for the wastewater utility can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. We'll start testing. Item number 7, discussion and possible action approving the development of an agreement with the Marathon County landfill to determine the feasibility of accepting leachate at the wastewater treatment facility. Who wants to kick that one off?
Yeah, so I think this is tied into that previous discussion as well, but we would like to begin working with the landfill on, taking our test results, working with them on a potential agreement to bring back to this body on what accepting leachate would be, right? So first step would be our testing, getting the data, the information, possibly looking at an engineering firm to determine, what our treatment system and process could handle. And then we would like an agreement in writing, and we have also talked with the landfill. They would like one as well, so at sometime in the future, possibly maybe beginning mid to late next year, a decision could be made on whether we would begin accepting the leachate and what that process would look like.
Mr. Robinson.
I support that efforts. We're part of a community, and the garbage that goes into the landfill comes from here as well as other communities. I think we have a responsibility relative to evaluating our options. I would just encourage us to be thoughtful in our approach, and potentially, we always run to engineering firms. Is there an opportunity for us to capture some expertise from through UW-Milwaukee or some other institutes relative to the assimilative capacity or removal capacity of that as they're doing their research on ways to extract or destroy it? Are there some grants that might be available without significantly accelerating the timeline or increasing staff cost? I would just encourage us to consider other sources of funding for that side of it. And with that, I would move to give authority to enter into negotiations with Marathon County Solid Waste Management relative to leachate sampling and evaluation of options.
All right, we have a motion. Is there anybody that would like to second this? We have a second by Jean. Further discussion here. I do like the idea of working with UW-Milwaukee. We've had some good conversations last year. So I see it's getting noted. Any further discussion? We do have Solid Waste Dave here in case you didn't recognize him. Alrighty, nothing else? All right, well, then all of those in favor of approving the negotiation and development of an agreement with Marathon County Landfill to determine the feasibility of accepting leachate at the wastewater treatment facility can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We're moving on to, I did not note at the beginning of the meeting, apologies, but item number 8, we're going to bump to October. We're waiting on a couple of numbers still, so you'll have to sit tight on that, and we'll have a great discussion then. So we are moving on to item number 9, discussion and possible action approving the budget modification for incentive pay in 2023.
Yeah, so at our previous discussions had talked about certifications which our staff, works towards having and that are a huge benefit to us with their knowledge and skills. And so thanks to the work of Ben and Scott and working with other municipalities as well as doing other research, came up with a schedule for incentive pay as employees become certified. And it also provides incentive for them to become certified. So there's a cost per hour, as well as we've kind of outlined what those certifications are in the tables that are attached as well. This is something actually that staff would like implemented immediately yet this year. And so if the commission has any questions about any of this that's being proposed as a first part of our phased approach.
We do have our Human Resources Director here too, if you have specific questions. Yes,
I'm
Alder
just
Herbst.
going to comment, thank you very, very much. This is long overdue.
Mr. Robinson.
Do we have an estimate on the fiscal impact?
I don't for this piece at this point for this year, John, for the remaining 4 months or so that we have left in the year. Just simply because I don't know what certification staff has right now overall, each, individual. Yeah.
Is the underlying, I just want to make sure that we've got on the record, the underlying assumption is that we're not able to attract and retain staff and we continually lose them. And one of the factors is our pay grade system. And that this is a step in the process of trying to make us more competitive with others in allowing for recognition of training and experience and expertise that they bring to the city.
Yeah, and I think it's also to get our staff trained up and provide them the incentives so we do have a highly skilled workforce in the complicated facilities that they do work in every day. Yeah.
Mr. Force.
Eric, the certification, or Ben, I should ask you, I guess, the certification process, and Scott, is that administered through the DNR? That's your Class A, Class B? Or
There's
however-
the introductory, which is operator and training, that's based off of so many years, and then you can be at an advanced level. So all the testing, certification tests or exams are through the DNR.
Right.
Definitely.
Okay.
So.
Other questions, comments? Anything? Yeah, Mr. Jean.
Excuse me, I know this doesn't affect the other support staff, so if that was going to be any pay adjustment to them, that's going to have to come through the salary study? Is
Yeah,
that?
yes.
Okay.
Mr. Robinson.
Final question relative to the fiscal impact. I understand, we have capacity within our current budget relative to salaries line to absorb these costs, even though we don't know what they are, I assume because of the vacancies that we've had. I'm seeing nods of concurrence.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Force.
And just to note, I think it was in our minutes from someone else, that retention of employees does not just depend on pay rate. There are other factors. So I'm fully in support of this, assume we'll pass it, but just a word that there are other factors that cause employees to stay or leave.
Agreed. What else? Anything else? Did we have a motion? I don't know that I have a motion by Robinson.
I would move to implement.
Okay, I have a second by Herbst. Any final discussion? All right, all of those in favor of approving a budget modification for incentive pay in 2023 can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? All right, this passes. Moving on to item number 10, discussion and possible action approving budget for necessary job reclassification and adding new positions at Wausau Waterworks in 2024.
So again, as far as looking at our staff and our employees for both retention as well as recruiting, one of the other proposals that we have in front of you is actually something we'd like to establish beginning in 2024 for the first pay period of 2024. And this is really, we looked at other municipalities as well as we looked at the AWWA wage comparisons as well as the job responsibilities through AWWA. And we came up with where our shortfalls are within our pay structure with from water and wastewater superintendent all the way to our admins. And then we looked at our job classifications, and we proposed some of the jobs to be reclassified. And also there are some actual budget impacts in here as well. And what we're looking for is a budget approval for the 2024 operating budget to move this forward and begin this in 2024 to make these changes.
Questions, discussion, Mr. Robinson?
So we don't have the fully loaded cost of this. Can we get that? What we've got is only the salary line, not the fringe line. So what are we running, about 30%, 28%? By the time you put in your retirement, Social Security,
It could be, John, yeah.
so we need to know what those costs are. The other question, how is this compared to the work that the city's being done? And, I just took one position and looked at it relative to the recommendation versus what, I took the AWWA, Rural Water, Fond du Lac, Merrill, Oshkosh, and whatever, and we were below the, with the adjustment, we're still low. And are we solving the problem, or are we kicking it down the road, and how does it compare with the work that's being done by Gallagher for the city? Is there support from HR on this approach?
I guess I would invite our HR director if you have anything that you'd like to share on the progress with Gallagher and how this kind of coexists or commingles with that work.
Well, right now, we're kind of at the end. Hopefully, we've got the report from Gallagher, and as I mentioned earlier, they're recommending a 3% change in the pay bands. Other than that, I don't have anything else. I don't have anything else to tell you.
And James, like what Gallagher did for us was like a market analysis, right? Based on the job. They didn't do a full wage analysis, like review job descriptions, all of that, like they did back in 19.
Yeah,
correct?
it was a complete compensation study, and
It was.
I think I had the list of the comparators that we used,
Okay.
and I do know that Appleton and Oshkosh were not ones because they're not considered to be comparable to Wausau.
No. And I think the challenge with that is the fact that, when you look at Appleton, you look at Oshkosh, and you look at the different type, that's one of the challenges that we have, like when we look at Gallagher and they're choosing our comparables, because they don't understand the complexities that we have in water and wastewater as compared to other municipalities. And I'm not exactly sure how they determine comparables. Is it just size of communities or otherwise? And so what we're looking at is actual professionals within the water and wastewater industry. And then when we look at other municipalities within Wisconsin, we try to focus what we're looking at on other municipalities that have the same types of treatment processes that we have, the complexities, the same type of certifications that we need, our operators in charge to have. And those are the salaries that we try to compare. So we do have, I feel, just a more focused study here than I think in a general scope of just looking at job descriptions, because when we look at the utility and the complexities that the utility has and the skills that are needed as well as the qualifications and responsibilities, I think we really need to look at other municipalities that have those same criteria.
I guess my question to that is what, if the people that we have now aren't certified, why would we compare them to people that are?
I think it's the job responsibilities,
But if they're doing them now without those, I mean, that's where I get confused, because when I looked at that report, we're going to pay for the certifications, we're going to do all this kind of stuff that they don't have now, yet we're comparing them to communities that already have these things in place.
Yeah, I guess I was looking at job responsibilities. I don't know if other communities have requirements of certifications, which is why we put the incentive pay in, So like, they're getting paid for the certifications that are not required in their job descriptions, right? But in their job descriptions, the responsibilities that they have, that's what I'm trying to compare to other municipalities that have the same, skill requirements that.
And I guess, so are we just going to say that the Gallagher is not going to be any good, and we're just going, whatever this information that you guys have is going to trump that, and we're going to have two different classifications within the city? Is that what I'm understanding?
I don't necessarily want that. When is the HR committee discussing the Gallagher study?
It'll be at this meeting on the 11th,
Next
September
week.
11th.
So I wonder if it would make sense to have it more holistically, including this Baker Tilly report, including the Gallagher report, and we could maybe consider a recommendation from that HR committee at our next October meeting, where we would kind of have that holistic view and maybe even some numbers associated, like specific. I'm seeing some nodding.
Because I'm not aware, Gallagher never discussed any of this with my staff. I'm not aware on their comparisons or anything like that, when they started this. So, staff has been going down this path for a couple of years, really since 2019 when Gallagher came back with their comparisons. So, I'm happy to continue to have this discussion. And we can get these numbers finalized, because this includes the additional staff that we're proposing in 2024 as well. But the reality is, for the responsibilities that our staff has, this is accurate. And what I'm proposing for reclassifications, I believe that this is accurate as well. So I'm happy to have that discussion with Gallagher too, and sit down with them as well, to explain as well.
And I recognize there's a necessary tension with having a utility commission, that separate policy body. But I think I kind of like the idea of the HR committee having a discussion about this holistically for the city, including this data for sure. And then maybe coming back and we could have a discussion with those numbers and that recommendation. But I'm willing to take feedback from this body.
No,
Mr. Force.
I think that's a good approach. I sense some tension here, and I think having that kind of a meeting might help us move forward.
I think so too.
Good.
Further comments? Okay, so that meeting is next week. Oh, Mr. Jean.
Is it the Gallagher report? The one that's recommending the 3%?
Yes.
Is that just a one-time adjustment?
It's adjusting the pay bands, so yeah, that would be the steps, adjusting the steps in the pay band.
Is there still a cost of living potential to be added to the year?
That's a separate Yeah, that's a separate,
Yeah, we're having that discussion as part of our budget
Okay,
talks,
all
and
right.
like my intention is to have a cost of living increase because that seems appropriate.
Well, if we just went with the 3%, I don't think we've gained much ground because we're not catching up to the who we're competing with to get people to be employed here. And I think what we've discussed, or I didn't discuss, but what's been brought forward here is something that I think we meaningfully need to proceed with, because I think it would provide the level of pay to compensate people who are operating that equipment right now. So,
so are we losing people to Oshkosh and Appleton? Are they going to drive an hour and a half from Wausau to work there? That's my question. When you keep saying that we're comparable, I don't know of anyone that lives in Wausau and is going to get a job in Appleton or Oshkosh and going to drive there and what if it is a couple of dollars an hour more? Is it worth that drive?
Mr. Jean?
I know in the past, we've lost people not to those communities, but very close communities after we trained them.
That
Yeah.
happens to everybody. That happens everywhere.
Well, it wouldn't happen if we had the right level of pay. So,
Okay, well,
So this discussion is going to be at our HR committee next week. I would invite any member of this body to, if you feel like attending, maybe let me know and we could notice of quorum, maybe potential quorum, but does that sound good? Okay, we'll talk about this again next month. Thank you.
The problem.
4:45.
here is that this is
4:45 next week, Monday, I believe.
774.
Yep. Okay, that is our last agenda item, so I guess I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I have a motion by Alder Herbst and a second by Commissioner Jean. All in favor can signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much.